that's coming from Vermont. So, but there's one other reason why, Senator, we think strongly in the labor movement we need real health care reform, because that's because, in fact, it is probably the single biggest impediment to growing our movement. And unless the movement grows in the labor movement, it is going to be hard to see real transformation, real reform happening across this country, getting the kind of change that we need. And as the labor movement has declined, it has also seen the decline of so many progressive things, and that income equality growing. And so the single greatest impediment to unionization right now is the resistance and the law breaking that goes on to keep the unions out. We know that we're not going to get labor law reform immediately, but by at least taking health care off the table, at least making health care a right for everybody, we will no longer be fighting on the issue of health care, and helping make that happen will be a big difference to our movement. Senator, we appreciate all the great leadership you're showing, and we hope that you'll continue for a long time to come. And we'll say now that I think it's very probable that you will have a great deal of support if you decide to run for president here in Massachusetts.
Rare pleasure for me to introduce a hero of mine for over 30 years now. And in fact, I believe, in my opinion, a hero for all Americans. United States Senator Bernie Sanders has for 3 decades been the nation's most persistent voice, defending the interest of the working class and standing up to the excesses of corporate America. No one in the nation over these 30 years has focused more attention on the critically important yet not talked about enough issue of the growing gap between the rich and the rest of us in America than Bernie Sanders. And frankly, I'm happy that he's thinking about running for president, because I bet you no other presidential candidate will talk about this fundamentally important issue. Back in the 90s, at a time when Wall Street, Alan Greenspan, and Bill Clinton were calling for further deregulation of the financial industry, Bernie Sanders raised the dangerous specter of a growing concentration of wealth among a small number of huge financial entities, and pointed out that such concentration could threaten the entire economic system. In fact, he challenged Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan at a hearing, suggesting that having virtually no controls on Wall Street activities could lead to a major economic crisis. Mr. Greenspan expressed faith in the ability of Wall Street to police itself. Well, I'm sorry to say that Bernie Sanders was exactly right, as Wall Street and their friends in Washington brought us to the brink of total global financial collapse 6 years ago. Senator Sanders is the longest-serving independent in the Congress, and is often described as the conscience of the Congress. Throughout his political career as a 4-term mayor of Burlington, and as Vermont's congressman for 16 years and U.S. Senator for 8 years, Bernie has always been an effective and articulate fighter for social justice. He has worked tirelessly in his 24-year tenure in Congress on issues that affect the needs of the people that government often ignores: working families, the middle class, the elderly, children, and the poor. Senator Sanders, or Bernie as he is known to the people of Vermont and to friends across this country, sits on the Environment and Energy Committees, where he has championed energy efficiency and sustainable energy development in the fight to curb dangerous greenhouse gas emissions. He is also chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, where he has recently led a major effort to pass bipartisan legislation that will significantly expand and improve healthcare services to our nation's veterans. Again, it's a great honor for me to introduce the man who dedicates every waking hours to standing up for working people in the middle class, United States Senator Bernie Sanders.
Great turnout. And we thank you all very, very much. And let me thank the Unitarian Church here for allowing us to use this beautiful, beautiful room. And I want to thank Sal and Mike and Jody for their comments and their very generous words about me. except after I speak, you will see that they weren't quite telling the whole truth. It's always hard to keep up with these wonderful introductions, but I'll try. What I want to do is a couple of things this evening. One, I want to talk a little bit about where we are as a nation politically, and what my fears are, and what my hopes are. Then I want to talk a little bit about issues that we don't see very much on TV or in the radio, and that is what is happening to ordinary Americans. And then I want to cheer you up a little bit and allow you to understand, and all of the speakers have touched on this, is that the problems we have today, which are very, very severe, and I know we're in a church now, but they didn't come from heaven, they came from people. And every problem that exists, which was caused by people, can be solved by people when we work together. And I'll be talking about some of my views about where we want to go. Here's where we are politically, and it's not a good position, and Jody touched on this a little bit. And that is, there's going to be an election in about 2 weeks in a nation where people are very politically demoralized. The political scientists estimate that about 60% of the American people are not going to be coming out to vote. They estimate that 70 to 80% of the young people between 18 and 21 will not be voting, and about 70, 80% of low-income workers, the people who are trying to get by on $7, $8, $9 an hour, they're not going to be voting as well. Of the people who do vote, the 40%, their incomes are considerably higher than the average American. And then in the midst of all of that, while a lot of people are demoralized and not voting, we have a Republican Party which is working overnight, working full-time, overtime, in trying to make it hard for people to vote. You know, what I have always believed is that, look, when you stand for office, if you don't have the guts to defend your point of view to the people, you shouldn't run for office in the first place. And I regard it as extremely, not only anti-democratic, not only anti-American, but absolutely cowardly, that you have these Republican governors who are working overtime to deny people the right to vote. And the reason that they are denying people the right to vote is they understand when people know what these guys stand for, they're going to get voted out of office. So the way they protect themselves is to try to make it hard for lower-income people, working people, young people to vote. And then on top of all of that, you've got other factors. You've got the Koch brothers and other billionaires who are spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. We don't know exactly how much they're spending. There's a lot of it is what we call dark money, undisclosed money. My guess is maybe $400 or $500 million to elect senators and members of the House and governors whose obligation and job in life is to represent the wealthy and the powerful. And then on top of all of that, if you're not worried enough, you got a corporate media which does everything that it can, consciously or unconsciously, to deflect attention away from the most important issues facing the American people. So you will talk about any damn thing in the world other than the collapse of the middle class, the growing gap between the rich and everybody else. You don't see that discussion terribly much in the media. So a lot of people turn on the TV and they say, am I the only person in America who's working longer hours for low wages? I don't hear that on the television. Am I the only person whose kid can't afford to go to college or has no health insurance? What about me? Why aren't they talking about me? And when people don't see their lives reflected in what they see, hear, and read, they kind of feel isolated and alone, and they say, I'm not going to get involved in politics. So you got all of that stuff going on. That's what we have to compete with. That's what we're trying to take on. Now let me now just tell you something. When we talk about politics, and media talks about all the dysfunction, Washington, nobody can get along and all that stuff. Let me tell you what's going on. Very, very simple. 30 or 40 years ago, we had two political parties in this country, Democratic and Republican Party. One party was called the Democratic Party, which is what we would call a center-left party. Never very radical. But under FDR and even Harry Truman, you had a party which understood that its reason for existence was to represent the working class of this country. Did they do it perfectly? No. But that was their reason. The people supported them. They were pro-union, unions supported them, and it was pretty clear. Then you had another party, Republican Party, which is what we call a center-right party, a conservative party, whose job it was historically to represent the business interest, the moneyed interest. And that's what the dynamic you had. 30, 40 years later to where we are today, because of a lot of influences from big money interests, you have a Republican Party which has moved from being a center-right party of people like Dwight David Eisenhower, Richard Nixon's domestic policies, not Watergate, to a party which can be defined in no other way other than a right-wing extremist party. That's what they are. Media doesn't refer to them as that. That's what they are. And the Democratic Party, also heavily influenced by money, while much, much better on virtually all of the issues than the Republicans, has moved from being a center-left party to being kind of a moderate party, which has some great people in it, but also has some people who are really not all that different from Republicans. So there's been a huge swing to the right. And now I want to tell you a story that many of you don't know about how, in a significant way, that occurred. In 1980, David Koch, one of the Koch brothers, ran for Vice President of the United States on the Libertarian Party. And he helped fund that party. And I'm going to read you right now the platform that David Koch ran on. And the extraordinary success of the Koch brothers is the ideas. I'm going to read word for word what is in that platform. What was in 1980 thought fringe, crazy, extremist, kooky, is now mainstream Republican positions. That has been the unbelievable success of spending billions of dollars on think tanks, on political organizations for the last 35 years. Ideas that when I was young, people would laugh at. These people are really crazy. People like George Herbert Walker Bush thought were crazy. Ronald Reagan thought were crazy. Are now mainstream Republican ideas, and people get up on television and they present these ideas. Oh, yes, that's right. That makes sense to me. Let me read you the 1980, some, not all. For all of this stuff, go to my website, sanders.senate.gov. And now you'll see how far the Koch brothers and others have taken this country in an extreme right-wing direction. Quote, everything I'm reading you is an exact quote from their platform. Quote, we urge the repeal of federal campaign finance laws and the immediate abolition of the despotic Federal Election Commission, end of quote. All of you are aware that 4 years ago, the United States Supreme Court gave us one of the worst decisions by a 5-4 vote in the history of America. This horrendous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. For the Koch brothers, what they are talking about in 1980 and what they've been pushing for is Citizens United is not good enough. They want to go further. Because what Citizens United says, you're a billionaire, you can spend as much money as you want on independent expenditures. What they want is to eliminate all law so that the Koch brothers could stand up here and have a meeting like this and say, you want to run for governor of California? Here's a check for $200 million. Here's the platform you're running on. There's your speechwriter. There's your media person. I own you. You work for me. Here's your check. And if you need more, give Harry a ring. All right? That's where they want to go. And right now you have the leadership of the National Republican Party saying exactly what the Koch brothers said 34 years ago. So they have made huge progress. Right now, you're seeing hundreds of millions of dollars coming into it. Not good enough now. They want to completely own the political process. Quote, this is another plank on their platform, quote, "We favor the abolition of Medicare and Medicaid programs." Not cutting them, the abolition of Medicare and Medicaid. Now, if you are 80 years of age and you walk into a doctor and the doctor diagnoses you with cancer and you don't have Medicare, you don't have a lot of money, what happens to you? You die. That's exactly what happens to you. Last year, the Ryan budget in the House did not end Medicare at all, did not end it totally, but they transformed Medicare. Their proposal would have transformed Medicare, if we allowed that to happen in the Senate, which we didn't, of course, into a voucher program. You know what that means? The program says, we are going to give you a check for maybe $8,000. You can go out to a private insurance company and you get the best insurance deal you can. What do you think you're going to get for $8,000 when you're diagnosed with cancer? 1 day care, 2 days care, maybe less. That is where the Republican Party is. But even that is too liberal for the Koch brothers who want to eliminate the concept of Medicare. Last year, that same budget, Ryan budget in the House, slashed Medicaid, which is health care for the poor. These guys want to get rid of it. Now, you may say in the back of your mind, well, you know, this was 1980. You know, they have evolved, they've changed. I study these issues. There is nothing that I have seen which tells me that they have in any way changed their point of view, and many of their think tanks, and they own many think tanks, discuss these issues in exactly these terms. Quote, "We favor the repeal of the fraudulent, virtually bankrupt, and increasingly oppressive Social Security system." We're not talking about cutting Social Security. We're talking about ending Social Security. Quote, "We support repeal of all law which impede the ability of any person to find employment, such as minimum wage laws." You know what that means? What that means is right now we are trying to raise the minimum wage, as you all know. I would go further, but in the Senate we have voted on legislation to take it to $10.10 an hour, which would increase wages for some 25 million Americans. Not enough, a step forward. What these guys believe, and if you talk to Republicans, as I do, in the Senate, and some of them have been upfront about it, they believe in abolishing the concept of the minimum wage, which means when you are in high unemployment areas, and a lot of workers are competing for a scarce number of jobs, and the employer says, I'm going to offer you $4 an hour. You don't like it? Good. I got 5 other people there who are ready to take that wage. And by the way, when you get on the job, you're not going to have any health or safety standards as well. Quote, "We advocate the complete separation of education and state. Government schools lead to the indoctrination of children and interfere with the free choice of individuals. Government ownership, operation, regulation, and subsidy of schools and colleges should be ended." End of quote. You know what that means in English? The end of public education. The end of state universities like the University of California or the University of Vermont. That means if you are a low-income family, what do you do with your kid when you want your kid to get an education? There will not be a public school there for you. Quote, "We support the abolition of the Environmental Protection Agency." If you pay attention to what goes on, the point that I'm making here is they have not succeeded. When you talk about Social Security, all of you are aware that Bush attempted to privatize Social Security. We beat him back. People are not necessarily now talking about ending in Congress the EPA, but that agency is attacked over and over and over again. And every rule and regulation that they propose is under vicious assault. Their understanding of freedom, the Koch brothers, is large corporations can dump all of their toxic crap into the air, into our water, into the land, and that's freedom. Because you don't want to take away the freedom of corporations to poison your kids, do you? You don't want to do that. So we got to get rid of the EPA. In terms of climate change, quote, again, this is 34 years ago, we support the abolition of the Department of Energy. And here's another one. I want you to listen to this one because this one kind of brings it all together. We oppose all government welfare, relief projects, and aid to the poor programs. All these governmental programs are privacy-invading, paternalistic, demeaning, and inefficient. The proper source of help for such persons is the voluntary efforts of private groups and individuals, end of quote. What does that mean? Essentially, what they are proposing is the abolition of every piece of legislation passed in the last 80 years to help working families, the middle class, the kids, the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. That's what this is about. Head Start, gone. Unemployment compensation, gone. Pell Grants, gone. Food stamps, gone. Meals on Wheels, gone. But Mr. Koch, what happens if I'm hungry and I don't have enough food for my kids? Well, maybe somebody will give you some charity, because that's what it's about. You go, maybe some rich person will throw you some crumbs. That is what this is about. Now, we don't talk about this very much. I've read this stuff on the floor of the Senate on more than one occasion, very little coverage from it. The Koch brothers are not conservative. The Koch brothers are not small government people. The Koch brothers are radical, right-wing extremists who want to undo every single piece of progress that working families have fought for in the last 80 years. They want to bring us back into the 1920s, where a handful of billionaires had it all, and ordinary people had no rights, where half of the seniors before Social Security lived in poverty, where the elderly had no health care, where the poor had no health care, where workers did not have the right to organize. That is their vision. It is a bold vision, it is a radical vision, and they have been fighting for that vision for many, many decades, spending billions of dollars, and they are achieving huge successes. And what politics today is about is whether we accept their vision of the future of America, their view of an oligarchic society, or whether we fight back not only for our lives, but for our kids and our grandchildren, and that we stand up to them and come forward with a progressive agenda that speaks to the needs of working people and is prepared to take them on and to defeat them. Let me just say a few words about things that I think many of you already know in terms of what's happening in the country today. Bottom line is, in one sentence, is that the great middle class of this country, which was once the envy of the entire world, is collapsing. That's the simple fact. My father came to this country at the age of 17, couldn't speak English, didn't have a nickel in his pocket, and never made any money, never made any money. But he was able to send his two sons to college. Pretty good, huge achievement actually. And millions of families were in the same position. Parents worked hard and they were able to do good things for their kids. Today what we have in America is a situation where the vast majority of our people, despite huge increases in productivity, are working longer hours for lower wages. Now, one of the things that's going on in the country is people wonder, they wonder why, with all of the explosion of technology, with all of the space age technology, the computers, the cell phones, the robotics, all of that stuff, which has made every American worker more productive, why is it that instead of seeing an increase in wages, an increase in benefits, as Mike was just talking about. What we're seeing workers having to deal with are cuts in benefits, cuts in wages. How does it happen? If I give you a tool that makes you 30% more productive, how does it possibly happen that you, in fact, are earning less than you did before this new technology developed? That's what people are asking. They want to ask, they are asking, how does it happen since 1999, the median family in America, that family right in the middle of the economy, half above, half below, is earning $5,000 less today than that family earned in 1999. If you are a male worker, you made $783 less last year than you did 41 years ago. Imagine that. You see all these guys, angry guys? That's why they're angry. That's why they're angry. They're working incredibly long hours, and they're falling further and further behind. If you are a woman, right in the middle of the economy, you're earning $1,300 less last year than you did in 2007. That's the fact. Now, Obama has a problem, and it's a difficult problem. He says, you know, compared to where we were 6 years ago, we're better off, and he's right. No ifs, buts, and maybes. The American people should understand that. But what the American people also understand is that while we're better off than we were 6 years ago, the vast majority of the people are hurting. They're struggling. You've got elderly people out there, I see it in Vermont, making decisions about whether they can afford prescription drugs or buy the food they need or heat their homes in the winter. You see the heartbreak, and I see this, people write to me, of parents who never went to college, whose dream was to be able to send their daughter to college. They can't do that. I meet with young people all of the time who did go to college, and they graduate $50,000, $100,000 in debt, have that debt chained around their necks, limiting their options. I talk to doctors in Vermont and all over this country who tell me that people walk into their office terribly sick, and the doctor said, why didn't you come in a year ago, 6 months ago? And you know what people say? My deductible was too high. I couldn't afford to come in here. I didn't have any health insurance. We lose some 40,000 people a year because they don't go to the doctor when they should, because they don't have insurance, or they have high deductibles. 40,000 people a year. That's the reality that is out there. The reality out there is that in this country, people are stressed out. We don't sometimes take a deep breath and just look at people. If you're on the transit or something, look at people. People are stressed out. You know why they're stressed out? Half of the families in this country have less than $10,000 in the bank. That means you are an automobile accident, you are a divorce, you are an illness away from financial disaster. People are thinking about, how am I going to retire? People are stressed out. They're struggling. Today in this country, an issue that we do not talk about at all, but of enormous consequence. We have 5.5 million young people in this country today who have either dropped out of high school or graduated high school. And you know what they're doing? Nothing. They're hanging out on street corners in Burlington, Vermont, and in San Francisco, California, because they have no jobs. You know what youth unemployment in America is today? Anyone know? It is 20%. When the papers tell you that unemployment is 5.9%, they're talking about official unemployment. If you include those people who have given up looking for work in high unemployment areas where there are no jobs, or those people who are working part-time where they want to work full-time, real unemployment today is 12%. You heard a whole lot about Ferguson, Missouri, and the shooting down of an unarmed African-American man. What you didn't hear about is that African-American youth unemployment in America today is 30%. 30%. And that a black baby, a black male born today, if we do not change the system, stands a 1 in 3 chance of ending up in jail in his lifetime. Now, while the Middle class is disappearing. And while we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth, and while we have 40 million people who have no health insurance, and while we have more people today living in poverty, and I have to tell you, coming here to San Francisco, Phil and I were just driving around, got a lot of people, as you well know, sleeping out on the streets. While we have all of that, there is another reality that is taking place in America. You know, it is one thing psychologically if a community is hit with a disaster, a hurricane, a storm, a flood, or something like that, and everybody gets impacted. And everybody says, isn't that a tragedy? We've got to pick it on up, we've got to rebuild. But what's happening in this country is there is a tragedy, and it is affecting the vast majority of the people, but it is not impacting all of the people. In fact, the people on top, in many respects, have never had it so good. Today in America, we have more wealth and income inequality than at any time since 1929 in this country. And that year, 1929, of course, was the year of the Great Depression. And that was not an accident. We have more wealth and income inequality than any major country on earth. You know, we're all familiar with our friends in the United Kingdom and their queens and dukes and lords. And you kind of think, well, that's a class-oriented society. We have more wealth and income inequality in the United States than they have in the UK. Today in America, the top 1% own 37% of the wealth of America. Now that's a startling fact, but let me give you a fact that is even more startling. The bottom 60% own 1.7% of the wealth. So let me translate that into a language. If you had 100 people in a room who were reflecting the 300+ million people in our country, and we divided up a pizza, 100 slices of pizza, one guy, a very chubby guy, gets 37 pieces of pizza. 60 people share 1.7 slices of pizza. You have today one family, the Walton family, owners of Walmart, who are the wealthiest family in this country, worth about $148 billion. They themselves own more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. This week, in a large community in Vermont, teachers went on strike. They went on strike over health care issues, significant cuts to their health care benefits. And all over America, school districts are struggling with how you can afford and how you pay teachers and how you have a strong public school system. Last year, the 25 most wealthiest hedge fund managers made more than $24 billion. That is 25 hedge fund managers. I'm not quite sure what a hedge fund manager does, but nonetheless, they do make a lot of money. The 24 billion that those 25 guys made, and I believe they were all guys, is equivalent to the full-time salaries of more than 425,000 public school teachers. Got that? And then you talk about the problems with our economy, and every day on television you're hearing these large corporations say, oh my God, we're being taxed to death. How much more can we bear? What all of you should know is that 1 out of 4 corporations pays nothing in federal income taxes, and the wealthy and large corporations manage to avoid paying about $100 billion a year because they stash their money in the Cayman Islands, in Bermuda, and in other tax havens. And over the last number of years, you have, last 5 years, you have corporations like General Electric, Boeing, and Verizon in any given year paid not only 0 in taxes, some of them got a tax rebate. Okay. So that is what the American economy is today. The dream of an expanding middle class, the dream that our kids will be able to do better than we, the dream that people, regardless of their income, will be able to go to college. Let me just, while I'm here in California, remind all of you of what you know. And this is where America is at. 30, 40 years ago, how much did it cost to go to the great University of California? Nothing. How much does it cost today? Anybody got kids at the University of California? 20,000? Okay. In other words, we are moving in precisely the wrong direction. Countries, recently some of you may have heard that in Germany, the last state in Germany got rid of tuition. Which is not unusual. That exists in a number of European countries. The woman who, I think she's head of the state there, she said, look, what we want is to see kids being able to go to school regardless of their income, get a higher education. Whoa, what a radical idea is that? What a radical idea is that? Today in our country, when you talk about education, we have hundreds of thousands of bright young people. Can't go to college, can't afford to go to college. We are in a highly globalized economy. We need the best educated workforce in the world. We have young people who can't afford to go to college. We have others leaving school deeply in debt. If you are a working mom today, it's true in Vermont, and I'm quite sure it's true here, go off to work. What do you do with your kid who's 3 years old? You try desperately, you search and you search and you search to see if you can find a decent quality and affordable child care center for that child. And in many cases, we don't have it. 0 through 3 are the most important years in development of a child, of a person, emotionally and intellectually. And you got God knows how many kids being cared for by people who are underpaid, not trained, taking care of kids in their most vulnerable years, because we don't have affordable quality child care. So those are some of the issues that are out there. Another issue which we should talk about, which we don't, is in the last 15 years, we have lost 60,000 factories in America. For the young people who may be here, let me tell you, which you may not believe, that there was once a time where you could walk into a department store and actually buy a product made in the United States of America. 30 years ago, the largest private sector employer in America was General Motors. Good wages, good benefits, strong union. Today, the largest private sector employer in America is low wages, no benefits, vehemently anti-union. And in terms of Walmart, you got a real painful issue. This is the wealthiest family in America, and I'm sure you will all be delighted to know that you are heavily subsidizing Walmart, which is one of the major welfare recipients in this country. Because the pay is so low and the benefits are so weak or non-existent, you got many of their employees who are on food stamps that you help pay for, on Medicaid you help pay for, or in government affordable housing that you help pay for. What do you think? Do you think maybe the wealthiest family in this country might be able to pay their workers a living wage and not get welfare from the American middle class? Talked a little bit about health care. He said it all. I'll just add to this. Again, everybody has got to know this. The United States of America today is the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right. The only country. And yet, despite the fact that we have 40 million people with no health insurance, and that number has gone down a little bit as a result of the Affordable Care Act. It used to be higher. Despite the fact that we have tens of millions of people who have high deductibles and co-payments, we end up spending almost, not quite, almost double what any other country spends per person on healthcare. How's that? And our healthcare outcomes in terms of life expectancy, in terms of dealing with a number of diseases, is in many cases not as good as other countries. So in terms of healthcare, we have two issues that we have got to deal with. Number one, should the United States join the rest of the industrialized world and understand that healthcare is a right and not a privilege? And second of all, if we make that decision, and I think most Americans understand that you should be entitled to health care, whether you're poor or rich or middle class, then the second question is, how do you develop a system which is cost effective that provides health care for all people? And I think the solution is pretty simple. Right now we have a good single payer system in this country. It is called Medicare. What we need is a Medicare for all single payer. Mike made this point. It is, just think, and it's almost hard to imagine, what it would mean to people throughout this country who knew that when you get sick, you go to the doctor. And if, God forbid, you or your kids and your parents have to go to the hospital, you don't have to worry about how you're going to come up with tens of thousands of dollars. Think what that means. Think what it means for the person who today, and there are millions of them, who stay in a job not because they want to be in that job, but because they can get decent health care. There was a story a couple of years ago. Some guy in his 50s enlisted, got into the U.S. military. You know why he went into the military? Because his wife had breast cancer and he couldn't find any other way to get her the health care she needed. Okay? Takes place all the time. And think, this was Mike's good point. If you are a business, maybe you want to focus on your business. Maybe you want to figure out ways that you grow your business, not have to spend half your lifetime figuring about health care. And if you're a worker, you know that you're going to get health care. You can sit around negotiating wages, deal with other issues. So it is a huge, huge issue that we've got to address. Let me very briefly, told you a little bit of some of the problems we're facing. Let me just for a moment talk about, give you an outline of what I think a progressive agenda should look like. First of all, when you go out to people, and every poll that I have seen, and I read a lot of polls, they say, okay, what do you think the most important issue facing the American people? Every poll, and regardless of your political views, you're liberal, conservative, moderate, whatever, people say jobs and the economy. That's what they say. People understand and are scared to death about the state of the economy in terms of jobs. Will you lose your job tomorrow? When you're 55 years of age, is your boss going to give you a pink slip and you get replaced by a 25-year-old at half the price, half the wages? When you're young, are you going to be able to go out and get a job? And what happens to you if you graduate high school and you don't get a job the first year, the second year, the third year? Are you ever going to get a job? And what happens to you then? What we need to do is to develop a massive federal jobs program putting millions of people back to work. And the fastest way that we can do that, according to the economists, is to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. Roads, bridges, rail, water systems, wastewater plants, dams, older schools. The American Society of Civil Engineers tells us that we need to invest about $3 trillion in rebuilding our infrastructure. Now, $3 trillion, you think, well, that's a lot of money. Well, guess what? We have spent over $3 trillion fighting the war in Iraq that we should never have gotten into in the first place. if we were going to be conservative and say, okay, we'll just invest $1 trillion into rebuilding our infrastructure, according to the economists, we can create 13 million decent paying jobs, and that is exactly what we should be doing. Want to create jobs, take a hard look at our trade policies. NAFTA, CAFTA, permanent normal trade relations with China, a green door for corporate America to shut down in this country, move their jobs abroad. Tonight when you go home, you turn on the TV, you're going to see all these companies telling you buy this and buy that and buy that. Maybe, just maybe, it's time for these guys to start building those products here in the United States of America and not in cheap labor countries all over the world. I don't have to tell anybody in this room that a federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour is a starvation wage. We've got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. Today in America, a woman can do the same job as a man and she gets 77 cents to the dollar of what a man gets. We need pay equity in America, equal work, equal pay. For a number of years, you have seen on TV a lot of these guys getting up there and saying, in very somber tones, we need entitlement reform. Now I want to translate that into English because they're too cowardly to tell you what they mean. So I will help you. When you hear somebody talk about entitlement reform, what they are talking about are major cuts in Social Security and Medicare. That's what they're talking about. And these guys lie a lot. I wish I could come up with a more diplomatic term, but I can't. So they say we need to cut Social Security because Social Security is going broke. Well, Social Security is not going broke. It has $2.5 trillion in the trust fund. It can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 19 years. And you know how you can extend Social Security for decades more? Right now, I know you know. But let me tell you anyhow. Make me feel good here. And that is, right now, you've got a millionaire and somebody making $117,000 contributing the same amount into the Social Security Trust Fund. You lift that cap, we can extend Social Security. And by the way, there was a fierce effort last couple of years to cut Social Security. Virtually every Republican wanted what they call the chain CPI. It's a mechanism by which you cut back on cost of living allowances. You come up with a new formulation. We beat them back with the help of millions and millions of people all over this country, seniors, veterans, women's groups, trade unionists, and so forth. Now our job is to get on the offensive on that issue, to stop talking about cuts in Social Security and talk about what really we should be talking about. When you got millions of seniors out there trying to get by on $13,000, $14,000 a year, we need to expand Social Security benefits. Now, earlier in the program, Jody raised a very, very important issue. You know, when I talk, all of these issues are so important. It is hard to say which is more important than the other. But clearly, I sit, I should tell you, on both the Energy Committee in the Senate and the Environmental Committee. And by the way, the chair of the Environmental Committee is your Senator Barbara Boxer, and she does an extraordinarily good job. Every other day, Barbara and I are in one fight or another. And one of the fights we are in, and Jody made this point, is we hear from the leading scientists not only in this country, but around the world. And with the exception of the Koch brothers and Fox Television, the debate is over. Climate change is real. Climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity in the emission of carbon and methane. Climate change today in California, Vermont, all over the world is already causing devastating problems. And as Jody mentioned, if we do not get our act together, transform our energy system away from fossil fuel, if we do not do that, the planet that we're going to be leaving to our kids and our grandchildren is going to be a lot less habitable than the planet we have today. There is a window of opportunity, and not a very long period of time. And we've got to get our act together. So the goal here, and we can do this, the goal here is to see the United States lead the world in transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and to sustainable energies like wind, solar, geothermal, biomass. And if we do that, not only can we reverse climate change, but we can lead the world, get China, India, Russia to move in our direction, and by the way, create a heck of a lot of jobs as we do that. That is a moral imperative. My wife always tells me that when I give a speech, people leave the room totally depressed. So she says I have to add a new ending to the speech, and she's absolutely right. And here's the ending. The ending is everybody in this room knows or should know, and certainly the trade unionists here know it. Nothing happens that's positive without struggle. It just doesn't happen. And let's just review some of the struggles that many of you in our lifetimes, not to mention people who went before us, have waged. And the point I'm going to make is that sometimes we take our achievements, our successes, for granted. Let me just back up for a moment. If we were sitting in this room 30 years ago, and somebody jumps up and says, you know, yeah, I know America has a lot of racism in it, you know, it's a racist society in many ways, but, you know, I think that by the year 2008, this country is going to overcome its racism. It's going to vote for a candidate based on his ideas and ability and not the color of his skin. And I think that 4 years after that, he'll be reelected. If somebody in this room said that 30 years ago, people would have looked at it and said, you are nuts. Anyway, it happened. And we elected an African-American president based on his ideas and not the color of his skin. Does racism exist in America? Of course it does. We all know that. And we've got to do everything we can to stamp it out. But we should be proud that this country has come so far in a reasonably short period of time to elect somebody who's president and not worry about the color of his skin. That's an achievement that we should be proud of. Second of all, we were sitting in the same room 35 years ago. And we look back, and people would say, well, how many senators are there in this country who are women? And the answer would have been 2. Today, we have 20 women senators, and my guess is the next 10, 15 years, half the Senate will be women. You have... How did that happen? How did that happen? It happened because of the struggles of women and their male allies to say, hey, judge us not by our gender, judge us by our ideas. And again, does sexism exist in America? Is there discrimination against women? Of course there is. But have we come a significant way? And here's what is really exciting. In your state, you have 2 women senators. And you know what? It's not a big deal. No one makes a big deal about it. You argue whether they're doing a good job, what their ideas are. That's what it's about. Not to vote for somebody because she's a woman or somebody's a man. You vote for somebody based on their ideas. So we have come a long way in overcoming sexism. I remember when I was mayor of Burlington in the 1980s, I did something really, really radical. We got a woman appointed to the Burlington Police Department. Oh, what a big deal that was. You're laughing. But that's the point. That was 30 years ago. Today, women in military, active combat generals, police officers, you have more women in medical school than men. There's been a significant transformation. We should be proud of that. Didn't happen overnight. Women and their male allies fought. Some of them went to jail in that struggle. Another example. When I was growing up, if a family had a kid with a disability, a baby was born with a disability, what happened to that child? As often as not, that child would be institutionalized. There would be embarrassment in the family. The kid would be hidden. People would move. As a result of governmental policy, among many other things, the attitude of this country toward the disabled has radically changed. Kids with disabilities are welcomed into school. They are loved. They're part of the human community. They are not, I don't want to say they're not discriminated. There's still a lot of discrimination. But we have made real progress. People in the disability community for years struggle. I remember when I was mayor of Burlington, I got in a wheelchair to go around the city to find how difficult it is to go from this across the street in a wheelchair and get onto a sidewalk with the curbs. So we had to figure out how you make curbs that are wheelchair accessible. Right? But we have come a long way. And last but not least, and here in San Francisco and California, you helped lead the effort. If we were to sit here 15 years ago, and somebody would say, you know, I think that in 15 years, you're going to have conservative states in this country supporting gay marriage. What would people have said? You're out of your mind. And this is how fast the transformation took place. Vermont was the very first state in the country to pass a civil union law. I can remember, like it was yesterday, the kind of hostility and bigotry that it evoked. We have a great state. I'm very proud of my state. But I remember marching in parades, people screaming ugly epithets at the governor and myself. 10 years or so later, Vermont became the first state to pass gay marriage, and you know what? Nobody cared. Virtually an issue. I go around the schools in Vermont. I like to go to high schools. And I go to some of the more conservative areas of the state. And I say to the kids, okay, raise your hand if you support gay marriage. And the kids look at me like, duh. And they almost don't know what the issue is anymore. 20 years ago, they would have known what the issue is. So what I'm saying here is that when people struggle, and certainly the gay movement in California has been a national leader in this, but when people struggle together, huge victories take place. The victory for women's rights is that no one talks about the fact that you have 2 women senators. It's just there, not a big deal. That's what we want. We want it not to be a big deal that somebody is gay. Who cares? That's the kind of society we want. Black, whatever they may be, Asian, doesn't matter. We have come a very long way in this country, and we should be proud in creating a much less discriminatory society. Okay? But there is one area of enormous consequence where we have not made progress, and in fact we have lost ground, and that is the economic struggle. That is the economic struggle. And today we sit in a situation, as I've tried to explain, where you have a huge concentration of wealth resting in the hands of a very few, while the vast majority of the people in this country are struggling to keep their heads above water. And as a result of Citizens United, this billionaire class not only controls the economy, they, in a significant way, now control our political life as well. And the task of the moment, and I use these words advisedly, is we have got to do everything that we can to prevent this country moving into an oligarchic form of society where this nation is controlled by a handful of billionaire families. That is the struggle that we are engaged in. It is a tough, tough struggle. Because these guys, they're very, very religious people. Their religion is greed. The Koch brothers are worth $85 billion. Now you might think that if you had $85 billion, you would feel a little bit economically secure. You know, you got enough to get by this year, your kids will probably do okay. Why in God's name? And I don't understand this. I really don't. If anyone wants to give me some ideas on this, I'd like to hear it. Why, if you have $85 billion, are you spending hundreds of millions of dollars to destroy Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, nutrition programs? Why? What motivates you? What do you need? Why? You know, and I think it has, you know, I don't want to get into, I'm not a psychiatrist here, but I think you all look at a problem which is more psychiatric than political, in the sense of, no, I'm being serious. You know, we all know people have problems with alcohol. We have friends who have problems with drugs. These people have problems with money. They need it more and more and more, and there is no end to it. And they're causing, in their greed, enormous problems in this country. So that is a struggle, and it ain't an easy struggle. But at the end of the day, the way we beat them is, you know, doing exactly what the trade union movement and others have done for years. We educate and we organize. There are a lot more of us than there are of them. When we bring our people together, we can beat them. And for the sake of our kids and our grandchildren, we must beat them. Thank you all very much.